What lies in the wall? I wasn't planning on digging that deep into the walls. Just a simple renovation, a fresh coat of paint, maybe some new shelves. But the plaster had cracked in one spot, right where an old bookshelf used to stand, and when I peeled it away, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. A slip of yellowed paper, wedged between layers of crumbling drywall. The ink had faded, but the message was still clear. Do not wake him. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Stupid, right? Just a note. Probably a joke from the previous owner, some creepy little prank to mess with the next tenant. But there was something else. The wall looked wrong. Unlike the others, which were sturdy, solid, this section had been hastily patched, the plaster uneven, smeared on in frantic strokes, as if someone had been in a hurry to seal something inside. I ran my fingers over it. The texture was different, softer, less dense. Almost like. I grabbed a hammer. Not because I believed in any of it, but because I didn't. That's how horror stories start, right? The idiot who ignores the warning, pokes around where they shouldn't. I wasn't scared. I was curious. The first swing cracked the surface. Dust and bits of old plaster rained down. The second strike went deeper, revealing darkness beyond, a hollow space inside the wall. The hole gaped, jagged and uneven, revealing, what? Nothing. Just darkness. A cavity where there shouldn't have been one. I widened the hole, my heart beat just a little faster now. A draft sighed through the gap, cool and stale, carrying something faint and rotten, like the breath of something very, very old. And then I heard it. A sound so soft I almost convinced myself I imagined it. A scratch. From inside the wall. I stumbled back, dropping the hammer, my breath stuck somewhere between my ribs. Mice. It's just mice. But it didn't sound like mice. Mice skitter. They scurry. This was different. Slow. Deliberate. Dragging. I turned away, shaking my head. I wasn't going to do this to myself. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I shoved a bookshelf in front of the hole. Out of sight, out of mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the note, about that empty space behind the wall. My bedroom was just on the other side of it. The thought made my skin crawl. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a hole in the wall. Just a stupid note. And then, around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. A soft scratch. Followed by another. And another. I lay frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned on the bedside lamp, trying to push away the panic tightening in my chest. I wasn't a child. I wasn't afraid of the dark. But the sound, it was closer now. I swung my legs off the bed, stepping onto the cool floor, my breath shallow. I crossed the room, hand shaking as I reached for the door handle. And then, silence. Nothing but my own rapid breathing. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe a draft. Maybe old pipes settling. But when I stepped into the living room, the bookshelf I had pushed against the hole had moved. Not fallen, just shifted slightly to the side. As if something had nudged it. As if something inside the wall was trying to get out. And that wasn't even the worst part. Right there, on the dusty wooden floor, leading from the wall toward the hallway, were footprints. Bare. Damp. Streaked with something dark. And they weren't mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. The footprints were real, too real, smudged and uneven, as if someone had stepped out of the wall with damp, dirty feet. My stomach twisted. The air in the apartment felt wrong, heavy, thick with something unseen but present. I followed the prints, my breath catching in my throat. They led toward the hallway, fading as they neared my bedroom door. My mind raced through possibilities. Someone broke in? No. The door was locked. Windows shut. I had been alone all night. Unless I hadn't been. I forced myself to move, to grab my phone, to do something, but my hands were slick with sweat, shaking. I tried to rationalize. Maybe I had tracked in dirt without noticing. Maybe the leak in the ceiling had dripped, mixed with dust. Maybe. A whisper. Not words. Just a sound. Like breath. Close. Too close. I spun around, my skin prickling. The living room was empty. My own reflection in the dark TV screen startled me, wide eyes, pale face. I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks. I needed to leave. Just get out, get air, get away. But I hesitated at the door. Because if I left, I would have to come back. And what if it was waiting? The thought made my chest tighten. I swallowed hard and turned back to the wall, to the hole. The bookshelf was still slightly shifted. That thing, whatever it was, had moved it. Had come out. I should have just left it alone. But instead, I grabbed the edge of the shelf and yanked it away. The hole gaped back at me, dark and yawning. Cold air sighed out, brushing against my skin. The smell of damp rot clung to it, thick and cloying. My stomach churned. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it inside. At first, I saw nothing but dust and crumbling plaster. Then, deeper in, something pale. I squinted, leaning in. The light trembled in my hand, casting long, flickering shadows. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was looking at. A hand? No. Something like a hand, but wrong. The fingers were too long, curled inward like something frozen in the moment of reaching. The skin, if it even was skin, was cracked, dry, flaking. I couldn't breathe. My body screamed at me to back away, to get out, to run. But then it moved. A slow, jerking twitch. The fingers flexed, nails scraping against the wood. My stomach flipped. My breath hitched. Every part of me froze. And then, from deep inside the wall, came the softest, most awful sound. A slow inhale. It was awake. I stumbled backward, my body moving before my brain could even process what had just happened. My heel caught on the corner of the rug, and I went down hard, my phone skidding across the floor. The flashlight spun wildly, casting jagged shadows across the walls. My chest heaved. My pulse roared in my ears. Inside the hole, the thing shifted. I heard it, a dry, papery rustling, like dead leaves scraping across pavement. My stomach clenched. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped in my own home. The air felt wrong. Thicker. Heavier. Like I was no longer alone. I crawled forward, fingers scrambling for my phone. The moment I grabbed it, the light landed back on the hole. The thing inside had moved closer. No. No, no, no. The gaping blackness of the hole had swallowed half the creature, but now I could see more. A wrist, bony and thin, covered in something cracked and peeling, like old paint. A shoulder, too narrow, as if it had been starved for centuries. And worst of all, a face. Not a normal face. Not a human face. At first, it looked like a mask, pale, unmoving, too smooth. But then I saw the cracks, the deep fractures running through what should have been skin. And the mouth. It wasn't right. No lips. Just a jagged slit, stretching too wide. The way it breathed was wrong, slow and deliberate, like it was tasting the air. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then the thing twitched. And in the dim, flickering light, I saw it grin. I lost it. I scrambled up, nearly tripping over myself as I bolted for the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock. It wouldn't turn. Why wouldn't it turn? My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. The room felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in. Then, behind me, movement. A low, scraping sound. The softest click of nails against wood. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it, as if that would do anything against whatever the hell was in my apartment. Silence. The hallway was empty. Dimly lit. Normal. But my mind was still trapped in that moment, replaying the impossible thing I had just seen. And then, the whisper. Not from inside my apartment. From the hallway. I turned, slowly. The corridor stretched out before me, lined with doors identical to mine. It should have been empty. But it wasn't. At the far end, near the stairwell, stood a figure. Still. Silent. Watching. Not human. Not anymore. My body was still shaking, but I couldn't afford to panic. It was too real, too wrong, and even if my brain was still trying to find an explanation, something inside me already understood that there was no explanation. The figure by the stairs didn't move, didn't come closer, just stood there, lost in the dim light, like a shadow that shouldn't have been there. Tall, unnaturally thin, with arms hanging too low, it resembled the silhouette of a broken puppet forgotten in the corner of a dark stage. I couldn't see its face, only the same absurd oval for a head, the cracks in its skin, and the way it slowly, terribly tilted to the side, as if listening. I took a step back, trying not to breathe too loudly so as not to give myself away, but the sole of my foot caught the edge of the carpet and the silence was cut by a soft but ominous rustle. In response, the figure jerked, as if someone had pulled it by an invisible string. My heart sank into my ribs with such force that I thought it would explode, but my feet, against all odds, remained planted to the floor, defying logic and instinct. I couldn't look away, couldn't even blink, because every cell in my body knew that if I turned away, she would come closer. The corridor was long, stifling, too quiet, even the air in it seemed frozen, as if this space didn't quite exist in reality. I had to run, find some light, find people, but even the thought of trying to turn back and leave this creature behind seemed pointless. It was waiting for that. And as soon as I moved, something would change, something, break in this moment of terrible frozen anticipation. And it did. Without a sound, the figure disappeared. It didn't move, it didn't rush forward, it just disappeared, like a burnt negative that crumbled into nothingness. The corridor remained empty, and that only made it worse, because now I didn't know where it was, didn't know if it had even gone. I felt something cold run through my skin, a knowledge that wasn't heard or seen, but felt with my whole body. It didn't disappear. It got closer. I spun around. My gaze fell on the dark, empty part of the corridor behind me, on the old door of the neighbor's apartment, on the cracked plaster of the walls, and on my own shadow, stretched across the floor in the pale light of the lamps. Only it wasn't my shadow. It was too long. Too thin. Too foreign. And she didn't move like I did. I didn't scream. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have shattered the sickening stillness, the suffocating silence that had wrapped itself around my apartment like plastic film over a corpse. But the scream stuck somewhere deep in my throat, useless, because something more primal took over. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, didn't even try to understand what was happening. My body just moved, my feet pounding against the floor, my hands fumbling for the light switch, for anything that would cut through the darkness. But the second my fingers brushed against it, a gut-wrenching sensation crawled up my spine, an icy, whispering certainty. It's not behind you anymore. I stopped. I had to. My breath hitched as I felt something shift in the room. Not sound. Not movement. But a presence. Right there. So close I should have felt breath on my skin, but I didn't. Just cold. A deep, unnatural cold pressing against the back of my neck, soaking into my bones like water into rotting wood. I turned my head, slow, deliberate, like a marionette whose strings had been loosened just enough to move. And I saw it. Not in the mirror across the room. Not in the shadows pooling in the corners. I saw it standing in the open doorway of my bedroom. Inside my apartment. The thing that had been in the wall. I don't know how I knew. Maybe it was the way its skin looked stretched too thin over brittle bones, like something that had been kept somewhere tight for too long. Maybe it was the way its head tilted, the same unnatural, listening tilt as before. Or maybe it was because I had already let it out. The moment stretched, sickening and unbearable. I wanted to run, to move, to do anything but stand there frozen in my own skin, but it didn't move either. It was waiting. Waiting for me to do exactly what it wanted. I couldn't let it win. I forced myself to take a step backward, my heel bumping against the edge of my coffee table. Another step. Another. I kept my eyes locked on its face, or where its face should have been. Because it didn't have one. Just smooth, stretched skin, like something unfinished. Like something that had never been meant to see the light. Then, just as my foot brushed the doorway leading into the hall, it moved. Not ran. Not lunged. Just blinked forward, like a skipped frame in a film, and suddenly it was closer. I choked on my own breath, my legs nearly giving out beneath me, but I didn't stop. I turned and bolted into the hallway, slamming the apartment door behind me so hard the frame rattled. My fingers fumbled with the lock, twisting, turning, securing it. And then I heard it. The scratching. Not from the other side of the door. From inside my apartment. From the walls. A slow, deliberate scrape. And then another. And another. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my skull, the world tilting beneath me. The hall was empty, the air still stale with old cigarette smoke and something sour, but I barely noticed. My body was still running on pure, electric panic. Then, from the other side of the door, I heard something new. Not scratching. Not movement. Just a sound, low and distorted, like bones popping back into place. And then... a breath. A long, shuddering breath. Like something waking up. The tension was only growing. And just as I thought that sound might have been the worst of it, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow and deliberate, the kind that only come when something knows it has time to enjoy the hunt. I could feel each step like it was vibrating in my chest. It wasn't in the hallway anymore. It was inside my apartment. I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to see it. The steps echoed off the walls, making their way from the living room toward the hall, each one dragging on the floor like something wet being dragged through dirt. The sound was growing closer, and I could feel my stomach churn, my knees wobble, threatening to give out at any moment. There was no escape. I needed to act. I needed to do something. But all I could do was stand there, locked in place, barely breathing, as those steps grew louder, more distinct, more real. And then, it stopped. Right at the door. Right behind it. The silence was deafening, like the world itself had just held its breath. And I was right there, trapped in the same breath, waiting, hoping that somehow, someway, it would just stop. But of course, it didn't. Instead, I heard the door creak. Just a little at first. Like something was testing it, feeling its weight, finding its weakness. And then the scrape of something thin and jagged sliding across the wood. It didn't sound like a hand. It didn't even sound like a fingernail. It was more like something sharper, like claws. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only listen. The scraping stopped for a moment, and then I heard it again, only this time it was different. It wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was inside. Behind the walls. Scraping against the plaster as though something was trying to get out. I should have screamed. I should have run. I should have. But something about it, something about how quiet it had gotten, how still everything was, kept me from doing anything. My skin was crawling, my blood running cold. I was trapped, not just by the walls of my apartment but by whatever was in it with me. Then, another breath. But this one wasn't from behind the door. It came from inside the wall. I could feel it. Hear it. A slow, steady exhale, like something was drawing in a long, painful breath, preparing for something that would come next. And I knew it wasn't going to leave me in peace. It wasn't going to stop until it had me, until it had dragged me back to where it had been hiding all this time. And in that moment, with the darkness creeping in from all sides, with the air so thick it was suffocating, I realized the truth. Whatever was in the wall, whatever I had let out when I opened that damn crack, it wasn't just trying to get out. It was coming for me. And it wasn't going to stop until it had me. There was nothing I could do to stop it. No way to undo the damage. No way to put it back in the wall. All I had left now was the sound of its breathing, the scrape of its claws, and the unforgiving silence that followed each step it took. And I realized then, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that I was never truly alone. Not in that apartment. Not anymore. Because whatever was inside the walls had found a way out, and it wasn't leaving.